A common question I get, even from people who aren't charged with a crime, is how common are false allegations in sex crimes? There's no empirical data, but I can tell you there's a lot of people that have been sitting in prison cells for years or decades, convicted of crimes they didn't commit. Sex crimes, murder, whatnot. And they're usually not exonerated until years or decades later with DNA evidence that may have not have been available to them at the time the crime was committed. And people are still being convicted wrongly of crimes they didn't commit. Just because you've been accused of a crime doesn't mean you actually committed it. And people have motivations for why they levy charges. I alluded to it earlier in another video where I talked about someone you met on Tinder, and they may not have liked the way you treated them that night. And that now morphs into a false allegation. You could be in a real tough custody battle with your soon-to-be ex, and suddenly out of the blue, there's an allegation by the child through the mother that you've been sexually abusing that child for years, none of which may be true. But there are times that parents, and this is really hard for people to stomach or believe, but parents can be very manipulative with their children. Or the child may have an innocent question that then gets turned into something not so innocent by the parent, or something is misinterpreted and turns into a false allegation. Also, children don't really understand the impact of their words. They don't know what prison time means. They can't project and think about the consequences of what they say. Very young children oftentimes engage in fantastical thinking, and they can't think like adults do, nor would we expect them to. But those allegations have very adult-like significant consequences. So yes, I would say false allegations are not uncommon. If you've been falsely accused of a sex offense crime, the first thing you need to do is get an attorney or a legal team involved. Someone like us, we can explain to you the process. We're going to take your story. We may interview you with a private investigator who can also extract more detail from you, and we'll start putting together a defense. What does that defense look like? I'd rather not say on camera, give away any thoughts about that to anyone who might be viewing this that is going to oppose that defense. But we're going to interview you at the very least and come up with a plan for the defense. So it all starts with getting the right legal team involved. That legal team needs to have significant experience in defending sex cases. The first thing you should do if you've been accused of a crime and arrested, before you even get an attorney involved, the first and most important thing you do is don't talk about it. Don't be answering questions. Don't talk with law enforcement, by God. Don't even talk with your family and friends about it. Why? Because there are things that could apply that you may be wiping out, like privilege. There's the marital privilege. There's the attorney-client privilege. There's the doctor-patient privilege. There's a number of privileges that could be eviscerated or completely lost if you are out and about trying to talk about how innocent you are to anyone who will listen. And those people potentially become witnesses against you in your own case. So the most important thing you can do before you hire your legal team is to keep your mouth shut. How do you prove a false allegation when trying to defend a sex crime? Well, let's be really clear. The law says you don't have to prove anything. The government, here in this case, the state of Maine, they have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. It is their burden to bear and their burden alone. We don't have to prove anything. We could literally go to jury trial, not put on a single witness for the defense, not ask a single question on cross-examination of the state's witnesses, and just rely upon the presumption of innocence and that the state proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So I first want to say, stop thinking in terms of what do we have to prove. We don't have to prove anything. The proof that must be put on is going to be borne by the government. It's not our burden, it's the government's burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. One of the most difficult decisions a client is going to be faced with is whether or not I take a plea agreement or I go to trial. Here's the problem. Some cases you can be looking at 10 to 15 years right out of the gate, depending on the nature of the allegations. Could be even more. Some of these crimes are punishable by up to 30 years in prison, especially if they involve a child. You're going to be faced with the possibility of, do I take a plea agreement or do I go to trial? And that's a really difficult decision. And for people who have been falsely accused of a crime, it's a huge leap to go from here and cross that gap to pleading guilty to a crime you didn't commit, even if it results in reduced or even no prison time. It's a tough gap to get across. So whether or not you should or shouldn't plead guilty to a crime that you know you didn't commit is going to be based on a conversation with your attorneys. Just understand that if you say, I need to be exonerated following trial because if I plead guilty to this, my marriage is going to end. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my professional license. I'm going to be blackballed out of my community. I'm going to wear the scarlet letter for the rest of my life and it's going to destroy me. All of those are legitimate concerns. You have to balance that against what happens if I go to trial and I lose. You can control an outcome to a degree through a skillfully negotiated plea agreement if you think it's in your best interest. But if you go to trial and lose, sentencing is in the hands of the judge, and it could be significant. So you have to weigh plea agreements versus benefits and drawbacks of trial. It's a risk-benefit analysis that you'll conduct with your attorney, but ultimately only you can make that decision. So if you've been accused of a crime that you didn't commit, a sex crime, you need a legal team that's ready to roll when you are. Give us a call at the Maine Criminal Defense Group. We're ready to roll now.